A bodybuilder mocks an old man at the gym, calling him Grandpa Karate and physically blocking his workout while filming for social media clout. The 280-pound musclehead and his crew surround the quiet stranger, laughing as they humiliate him with baby weights and senior citizen jokes. But when the bully grabs the old man's wrist to drag him away, he realizes this isn't just any aging gym member. This is Steven Seagal himself. The bodybuilder has no idea he just picked a fight with a man who spent 50 years perfecting the art of making giants fly across rooms. While the punk flexes for his Instagram followers, the Aikido master shifts his stance with that deadly calm that made him a legend. The gym falls silent as every person realizes they're about to witness something extraordinary. The bodybuilder's crew keeps recording, thinking they're capturing another humiliation, but they're actually filming the moment their leader discovers why you never mess with a true warrior. What happens when 280 pounds of ego meets 40 years of martial arts mastery? Will the bully survive learning the difference between show muscles and real power? What happened next would leave the bodybuilder speechless for the rest of his pathetic existence. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first rays of dawn crept through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Muscle Beach Fitness, casting long shadows across the polished concrete floor. At 6 a.m., the Santa Monica gym held that peculiar quiet that only existed before the world fully awakened. The soft hum of ventilation systems, the distant crash of Pacific waves, and the gentle clink of weight plates as early risers began their morning rituals. That a lean figure moved through the entrance with the fluid grace of someone who understood that true strength began with silence. Steve Stevens, as the membership card read, appeared unremarkable at first glance, gray-streaked. Hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, worn black workout clothes, sneakers that had seen better days. To the casual observer, he might have been another aging actor desperately clinging to faded glory. But there was something in the way he moved, something that suggested depths beneath the surface. Martha Kowalski barely glanced up from her paperwork. Behind the front desk, the stocky Polish-American woman had seen every type of gym member over the past 15 years, the dedicated, the desperate, and the delusional. This one signed in quietly, offered a polite nod, and made his way toward the free weights without fanfare or attitude. Already, he was different. Frank DeMarco, a 73-year-old Korean War veteran, acknowledged the newcomer with a subtle nod from his position at the leg press machine. Rose Santangelo, a retired nurse performing her daily stretching routine, smiled warmly but respected the man's obvious preference for solitude. Stephen began with movements that looked more like meditation than exercise. Each stretch flowed into the next with deliberate precision, his breathing controlled and rhythmic. His limbs moved through ancient patterns that spoke of decades of dedicated practice, though he kept the technique subtle enough to avoid drawing attention. As he transitioned toward the free weights, Stephen's eyes swept the gym's layout with the tactical awareness of someone long accustomed to assessing potential threats. The camera mounted in the corner registered in his peripheral vision, as did the emergency exit position behind the squat racks. Old habits died hard, especially when staying alive had once depended on such observations. That he selected a pair of 40-pound dumbbells, modest weight that wouldn't attract unwanted attention, and began a series of controlled exercises that engaged muscles most people had forgotten they possessed. Every movement demonstrated perfect form, maximum efficiency, minimum wasted energy. The gym's morning tranquility was about to be shattered, though Stephen couldn't know it yet. For now, there was only the weight in his hands, the steady rhythm of his breathing, and the familiar comfort of physical discipline that had sustained him through 5 decades of extraordinary challenges. Outside, a customized Hummer rumbled into the parking lot, its engine announcing the arrival of someone who preferred a very different kind of entrance. The Hummer's doors slammed with the authoritative bang of someone who considered subtlety a character flaw. Derek Mansfield emerged from the driver's seat like a force of nature constrained by mere mortal flesh, 6 feet 4 inches of chemically enhanced muscle wrapped in a tank top that proclaimed alpha across his massive chest. At 32, he carried himself with the swagger of a man who had never encountered a problem he couldn't intimidate into submission. His entourage followed in formation, Tony Ricci clutched a professional-grade camera, ready to capture content for Derek's Instagram empire. Brad Wilson, nearly as large as Derek himself, served as both training partner and muscle. Jake Morrison, wearing the logo-covered attire of a supplement company, completed the crew with his constant commentary and sycophantic laughter. 500,000 followers knew Derek as a Derek the Destroyer, the social media influencer who turned daily workouts into theater. His content formula was simple and effective: demonstrate physical superiority while humiliating anyone who didn't meet his standards. Gym newcomers, elderly members, anyone attempting exercises beyond their obvious capabilities, all became potential entertainment for his audience's voracious appetite for dominance and mockery. "Morning, Martha," Derek announced, his voice carrying across the gym with practiced projection. The greeting was less acknowledgement than declaration of territorial claim. His premium membership fee gave him certain privileges, and he intended to exercise every one of them. Martha Kowalski looked up from her paperwork with the resigned expression of someone who had learned to tolerate necessary evils. Derek brought publicity and revenue to the gym. Even if his methods occasionally crossed ethical lines, she preferred not to examine too closely that Derek's workout routine began with the systematic claiming of equipment. Water bottles and towels appeared on multiple machines, marking territory like a dog marking fire hydrants. Other gym members automatically adjusted their routines to accommodate his unspoken but clearly understood requirements. The bench press station became his throne, and the 405 pounds he loaded onto the bar served as both workout weight and statement of dominance. Tony positioned himself for optimal filming angles while Derek began his chest routine, each repetition accompanied by grunts calculated for maximum intimidation effect. The camera captured every moment, every flex, every demonstration of superior genetics and pharmaceutical enhancement. "Looking good, D," Brad offered. Though his commentary was merely part of the performance, Derek's eyes swept the gym between sets, searching for today's content opportunity. The elderly regulars knew better than to provide him with material. The serious bodybuilders commanded too much respect for casual harassment. But there, in the corner near the free weights, an older man performed what appeared to be ineffectual stretching exercises. Perfect target demographics. Aged, apparently. Weak, probably intimidated easily. "Looks like we got fresh meat today, boys," Derek announced, loud enough for Tony's microphone to capture. "Grandpa's about to learn how a real gym works." Derek approached the free weight area with the measured confidence of a predator who had never encountered effective resistance. His crew moved into practiced positions, Tony adjusting his camera angle for optimal lighting, Brad positioning himself to block potential escape routes, Jake preparing to provide the running commentary that Derek's followers expected. The older man continued his controlled movements, seemingly oblivious to the approaching storm. Up close, Derek could see the stranger was probably in his 70s, lean rather than muscular, moving with an odd sort of fluid precision that looked more like dance than serious exercise. The modest weight he had selected, 40-pound dumbbells, only, confirmed Derek's assessment of an easy target. "Excuse me, sir," Derek began, his voice carrying the false courtesy that preceded most of his social media ambushes. "I couldn't help but notice you might benefit from some guidance on proper form." The man glanced up briefly, dark eyes taking Derek's measure in a single look, then returned to his exercise without comment. The dismissal was subtle but unmistakable, and Derek felt the familiar surge of irritation that fueled his best content. "You know, we see a lot of guys your age come in here thinking they can jump right back into their high school routines," Derek continued, speaking loud enough for Tony's camera to capture every word. "The thing is, after a certain point you really need to adjust your expectations. Maybe consider the senior center down the street. They have equipment more suited to your demographic." Still no response. The older man simply continued his routine, each movement controlled and deliberate, his breathing steady and rhythmic. Derek recognized the type, stubborn old-timer who needed reality demonstrated rather than explained. "I'm just trying to help," Derek pressed, stepping closer. "At your age, you could seriously hurt yourself trying to lift weights like that. Have you considered the walking program at the community center?" He accidentally bumped into the man while reaching for a heavier set of dumbbells, testing his balance and reaction time. The contact was absorbed without resistance, like pushing against water. Interesting. Most people either stumbled or showed annoyance. This one did neither. Other gym members began to notice the developing confrontation. Martha glanced over from the front desk with growing concern. Frank DeMarco paused his leg press routine to watch. Rose Santangelo's stretching slowed as she focused on the interaction. Derek decided to escalate for the cameras. He moved directly in front of the man's workout space, physically blocking access to the weight rack, while Tony adjusted his position for the best angle. Maybe we should start with something more appropriate, Derek suggested, his tone shifting from false courtesy to condescending authority. What do you say we try some baby weights? Work our way up gradually. The older man finally looked directly at Derek, making eye contact for the first time. What Derek saw there should have warned him, but confidence built on a foundation of unchallenged dominance rarely recognizes its own limitations. The dark eyes held depths Derek couldn't fathom, calm and measuring, like still water concealing dangerous currents beneath its surface. Derek positioned himself squarely in the older man's workout space, close enough that his massive frame cast a shadow over the smaller figure. His camera crew had found their angles, Tony's phone capturing everything, while Jake provided whispered commentary for the live stream that was already drawing viewers. Here's what we're going to do, Derek announced, his voice projected for maximum audience impact. I'm going to help you transition to something more age-appropriate. He reached over and moved the 40-pound dumbbells aside, replacing them with a pair of 10-pound weights while smirking directly at the camera. These should be perfect for someone at your stage of life. The substitution drew chuckles from his crew and approving comments from the live stream viewers. Derek had performed this routine dozens of times with various targets, and it never failed to generate engagement. Humiliation content was social media gold, especially when delivered with the veneer of helpful advice. The older man observed the weight swap with the same calm attention he might give to changing weather patterns, noting the development without apparent emotional investment. This lack of reaction only encouraged Derek to push further. Look, I get it, Derek continued, warming to his theme. When you hit your 70s, it's natural to want to recapture some of that youthful vigor. But reality is reality, you know? Maybe you were something back in your day, high school football player, weekend warrior, whatever, but those days are over. The sooner you accept that, the safer everyone will be. Martha Kowalski had moved from behind the counter, her expression shifting from resigned tolerance to active concern. The other gym members formed a loose circle, some holding up phones to record what they assumed would be another Derek Mansfield social media spectacle. Derek noticed his growing audience and played to the crowd. I bet back in the day, you probably told people you knew karate or something. Every guy your age has some story about their military service or martial arts training. Let me guess, Vietnam veteran who studied kung fu in the jungle. The comment about martial arts struck something because Derek noticed the older man's posture shift almost imperceptibly. The change was subtle but unmistakable to someone who had spent years studying body language for signs of intimidation and submission. I was right, wasn't I? Derek pressed his advantage. Little bit of grandpa karate in your background? Maybe watched a few too many Bruce Lee movies and convinced yourself you were dangerous. Still no verbal response, but Derek could sense he had found a pressure point. The man's movements had changed, becoming more deliberate, more focused. Instead of recognizing this as a warning sign, Derek interpreted it as confirmation that his psychological tactics were working. Tell you what, Grandpa Karate, Derek said, the nickname rolling off his tongue with practiced derision. Why don't we call it a day? Maybe stick to the cardio section where people your age usually hang out. Less chance of pulling something important. When the older man quietly continued his routine without responding to the verbal assault, Derek decided physical intimidation was necessary. He stepped even closer, using his 6'4" frame and 280 pounds of muscle to loom over his target. I'm talking to you, Derek said, his voice dropping to a more threatening register. When someone's trying to help you, the polite thing to do is acknowledge it. He placed his massive hand on the older man's shoulder, applying pressure that was meant to demonstrate the vast difference in their physical capabilities. The touch was neither resisted nor acknowledged. But Derek felt something shift in the atmosphere around them, like the moment before lightning strikes. The pressure on his shoulder registered like a distant irritation, but Steven Seagal had felt the touch of genuine killers and knew the difference between theatrical intimidation and real threat. Derek's grip was strong, impressively so for someone his age, but it carried the clumsy force of someone who had never learned to use strength as anything more than a blunt instrument. "You know," Steven said, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying an authority that seemed to come from somewhere deep and ancient. "I've been in this game for a long time. I've seen a lot of guys like you." The words emerged with that distinctive cadence that had once made him famous, each syllable deliberate and weighted with meaning. Derek felt something shift in the dynamic between them. The older man's voice didn't match his apparently vulnerable appearance. "Guys who mistake size for strength," Steven continued, still speaking in that calm, conversational tone that somehow commanded more attention than Derek's aggressive projections. "Who think intimidation and power are the same thing. Who believe that because they can dominate someone weaker, they understand what real strength means." Derek increased the pressure on Steven's shoulder, expecting compliance or at least visible discomfort. Instead, the older man continued speaking as if the physical contact was merely a minor distraction from a more important lesson. "Real strength," Steven said, his dark eyes meeting Derek's with disturbing calm, "comes from discipline, from understanding that power exists to protect those who cannot protect themselves, from knowing that the greatest victory is the one that requires no violence at all." Tony's camera captured everything, the live stream viewers increasing as word spread about the unusual confrontation. But something in the older man's demeanor was affecting the room's atmosphere. Other gym members moved closer, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented in Derek's usual performance. Martha had stopped pretending to work, her hand hovering near the phone she kept for emergencies. Frank DeMarco and Rose Santangelo watched with the fascination of people who recognized echoes of something from their own past. "But when violence becomes necessary," Steven concluded, his voice maintaining its whispered intensity, "it should be swift, precise, and absolutely final." Derek's frustration peaked. Words were supposed to break people, reduce them to stammering compliance. This old man was turning his own psychological tactics against him somehow. "That's enough philosophy, Grandpa," Derek snarled, grabbing Steven's wrist with his free hand. "Time for you to learn some respect." He pulled, intending to drag the smaller man toward the exit in a final demonstration of physical dominance. The moment Derek's grip tightened around his wrist, something fundamental changed in Steven's bearing. What happened next occurred so quickly that witnesses would spend years arguing about the precise sequence of events. Derek attempted to use his superior size and leverage to force Steven toward the gym's exit, expecting the demonstration of raw physical dominance that had intimidated dozens of previous targets. Instead, Derek found himself moving through empty air. Steven's body had shifted with fluid precision, his stance dropping slightly as 40 years of Aikido training transformed Derek's aggressive momentum into the bodybuilder's own defeat. The technique was pure poetry, a simple turn of Steven's torso that redirected all 280 pounds of enhanced muscle through a trajectory that Derek had never intended. For a brief, impossible moment, Derek experienced flight. His massive frame sailed over a workout bench with almost graceful motion before gravity reasserted itself with violent authority. The impact came as Derek crashed into a rack of dumbbells, the metallic clatter echoing through the suddenly silent gym like thunder in a cathedral. The throw had looked effortless from Steven's perspective, a minimal adjustment of position and timing that used Derek's own force against him. No excessive violence, no unnecessary brutality, just the precise application of physics and 40 years of dedicated practice. Derek's phone spun across the floor, its screen spider-webbing against the concrete with a sound like breaking dreams. The device that had captured so many humiliations finally suffered its own destruction. The last image frozen on a feed that had gone abruptly dark. Tony's camera continued recording, but his hands shook as he tried to process what he had witnessed. Brad stood frozen in position, his mouth hanging open like a landed fish. Jake's constant commentary had ceased entirely, replaced by stunned silence. The other gym members gasped and began pulling out their own phones, though none of them were quick enough to capture the actual technique. They could only document the Aftermath. Derek lying unconscious among scattered dumbbells, his massive frame looking strangely vulnerable in defeat. Steven stood exactly where the confrontation had begun, his posture relaxed and breathing unchanged. He calmly adjusted his ponytail with the same casual motion he might use to brush away a fly, then moved to check on Derek's condition. The transition from warrior back to concerned citizen happened in an instant, as if Steven could shift between different versions of himself with the ease of changing clothes. That Martha's hand had frozen halfway to the emergency phone, her mind struggling to reconcile what she had witnessed with any logical explanation. In the space of 3 seconds, Derek Mansfield's understanding of the universe had been fundamentally altered, though he would need to regain consciousness to fully appreciate the magnitude of his miscalculation. Steven knelt beside Derek's unconscious form with the practiced efficiency of someone trained in both causing and treating combat injuries. His fingers found the pulse point at Derek's throat, strong and steady, if somewhat rapid from the shock of impact. A quick examination revealed no serious damage beyond bruised pride and scattered equilibrium. "Easy," Steven murmured as Derek began to stir, his voice carrying the gentle authority of someone accustomed to managing post-combat situations. "You took a hard fall. Don't try to move too quickly." Derek's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. The last thing he remembered was grabbing the old man's wrist. Now he was lying on the floor surrounded by dumbbells, staring up at concerned dark eyes that somehow seemed familiar. "What?" Derek started, then stopped as the world spun slightly. Steven's steady hand on his shoulder provided an anchor point, as consciousness slowly returned. "You're going to be fine," Steven assured him, helping Derek sit up with careful attention to signs of concussion or spinal injury. "Just bruised. Nothing that won't heal with time and humility." The voice triggered recognition in Martha Kowalski, who had approached cautiously during the aftermath. That distinctive whisper, the fluid movement, the impossible technique. Pieces of a puzzle suddenly clicked into place with startling clarity. "Steven Seagal?" she asked, her Polish accent thick with disbelief. Steven neither confirmed nor denied the identification, but his lack of denial spoke volumes. The way he carried himself, the precision of his movement, the calm authority in crisis. Everything suddenly made sense to anyone who had grown up watching action movies in the 80s and 90s. Derek's crew stood in stunned silence, their usual bravado replaced by something approaching awe. Tony's camera hung forgotten at his side while he tried to process the impossibility of what had just occurred. Derek himself seemed genuinely transformed by the experience. The arrogance that had defined his personality for years had been literally knocked out of him, replaced by something that might have been the beginning of wisdom. "I don't understand," Derek said quietly, studying Steven's weathered face with new respect. "How did you?" "True strength," Steven replied, helping Derek to his feet with gentle firmness, "doesn't come from the size of your muscles or the number of your followers. It comes from understanding that power exists to protect others, not to dominate them." The words carried weight because they came from someone who had just demonstrated their truth with devastating effectiveness. Derek nodded slowly, perhaps for the first time in his adult life, genuinely listening to wisdom from someone else. The gym's atmosphere had completely shifted from entertainment venue to classroom, with a lesson that none of the witnesses would ever forget. Just as the situation appeared to be resolving into a moment of genuine human connection, the front door burst open with sharp authority. 3 men in expensive dark suits entered Muscle Beach Fitness with the coordinated movement of professionals who had performed similar entries countless times. Their presence immediately transformed the gym's atmosphere from resolved tension back to active danger. The lead figure flashed his badge with practiced efficiency while scanning the room with eyes that missed nothing. "Detective Ray Murphy, LAPD," he announced. Though his attention focused immediately on Steven rather than the scene of apparent assault he had ostensibly come to investigate, Steven's entire posture shifted as the implications hit him like physical blows. The peaceful instructor vanished, replaced by someone who understood that his carefully maintained cover had just been catastrophically compromised. "Mr. Seagal," Murphy said, approaching with the casual authority of someone delivering routine news rather than a potential death sentence. "We need to talk. Some very bad people think you're dead, and we need to keep it that way." Martha overhead the words and realized her gym had become ground zero for something far more serious than a social media dispute. The two federal agents flanking Murphy, their bearing and positioning clearly identified them as government despite their lack of visible badges, had positioned themselves strategically near exits. Derek, still recovering from his encounter with the floor, processed the revelation that he had just picked a fight with a legitimate action hero who was apparently in federal witness protection. The magnitude of his miscalculation began to dawn on him with sickening clarity. "Your cover's been blown," Murphy continued urgently, his voice low but carrying clearly in the sudden silence. Derek's little social media stunt was recorded by gym security cameras that are monitored by people who shouldn't have that access. The facial recognition software got enough data to confirm your identity and location. Stephen absorbed the information with the calm resignation of someone who had always known this moment would come eventually. 6 months of careful anonymity had been destroyed by a bodybuilder's need for Instagram content. Murphy gestured toward the gym's back office. "We need to evacuate you immediately. There's already a team en route to Los Angeles specifically to eliminate you before you can testify." But Stephen remained motionless, studying Murphy with the same measuring gaze he had given Derek minutes earlier. Something in the detective's urgency felt rehearsed, too convenient. "I think," Stephen said quietly, his whispered words carrying more authority than Murphy's urgent projections, "it's time to finish what we started." Derek realized he was no longer a spectator in this situation. Somehow, his social media stunt had made him a participant in something far beyond his understanding. The confrontation at Muscle Beach Fitness was only the beginning of a much larger and more dangerous game. In Martha's cramped office behind the gym, Murphy closed the blinds while federal agents Collins and Rodriguez established a security perimeter. Stephen sat with the calm patience of someone who had received similar briefings before, though the stakes had never been quite this personal. 6 months ago, your investigation into Viktor Kozlov's trafficking network led to raids that rescued 47 victims. Murphy began, spreading photographs across Martha's desk. "But we only got the small fish." Kozlov's organization adapted, moved operations, eliminated witnesses. Stephen studied the images, faces of young people who had disappeared into a nightmare of exploitation and violence. Each photograph represented someone's child, someone's hope destroyed by systematic evil. "Your handler, Agent Patricia Wong, was murdered last week," Murphy continued, "tortured for information before being executed in her apartment. They knew she was your contact, knew she had evidence that could bring down the entire network." The news hit Stephen like a physical blow. Patricia had been more than his handler. She had become a friend, someone who understood the weight of hunting monsters in a world that preferred to ignore their existence. "Security footage from this gym has been accessed by hackers working for Kozlov's people," Murphy explained, pointing to the camera mounted in the corner. Derek's Instagram live stream provided facial recognition software with enough data points to confirm your identity and current location. Stephen's jaw tightened as he absorbed the implications. Months of careful cover, destroyed by social media. Narcissism. Murphy showed Stephen a photograph of Viktor Kozlov, a man in his 60s with silver hair and cold blue eyes, wearing the expensive confidence of someone who considered himself untouchable. He runs the trafficking operation through underground fight clubs where victims are forced to compete for the entertainment of wealthy clients. "How long do we have?" Stephen asked quietly. "A team of professional assassins landed at LAX 3 hours ago," Murphy replied. "They're already in Los Angeles, specifically tasked with eliminating you before you can testify against their operation." Stephen stood, his decision made. "Then it's time to go hunting." Outside Martha's office, Derek sat heavily on a workout bench, his head buried in his hands as the magnitude of his situation crashed over him like a collapsing ceiling. His crew, Tony, Brad, and Jake, huddled nearby, whispering frantically about damage control while deleting social media posts with panicked efficiency. Agent Collins emerged from the office, her federal badge catching the gym's fluorescent lighting. At 38, she carried herself with the competent authority of someone who had spent years tracking dangerous criminals through bureaucratic mazes. "Mr. Mansfield," she said, approaching Derek with professional directness, "your social media." Activities have made you a potential liability in an ongoing federal investigation. Derek looked up with eyes that had aged years in the past hour. What does that mean? It means Viktor Kozlov's organization eliminates loose ends as standard operating procedure, Collins explained, showing Derek photographs of previous victims, people whose only crime had been witnessing something they shouldn't have seen. This blogger posted a video that accidentally captured one of Kozlov's recruitment operations in the background. Collins pointed to a photograph of a young man with a bright smile. He was found dead in his apartment 2 days later, staged to look like suicide. Derek's face paled as the implications sank in. His Instagram following, once his greatest asset, had become a beacon drawing killers to his location. Your sister, Collins continued. Melissa Mansfield, 28, disappeared 6 months ago from Club Nexus in West Hollywood. The timing coincides exactly with Agent Seagal's initial investigation into Kozlov's network. The connection hit Derek like a physical blow. Melissa's disappearance hadn't been random. She had been taken specifically because of her proximity to something larger and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. They have my sister, Derek whispered the words. Carrying the weight of absolute certainty and devastating guilt, Collins nodded grimly. Club Nexus serves as a recruitment front for Kozlov's operation. They target attractive young people with promises of modeling opportunities, acting careers, fitness sponsorships. Derek stood with new determination, his earlier humiliation transformed into focused rage. I want to help. Whatever this is, whatever you need, I'm in. This isn't social media, Mr. Mansfield, Collins warned. These people kill for a living. They have my sister, Derek repeated, and Collins recognized the dangerous certainty of someone who had nothing left to lose. The office door opened, and Stephen emerged to face Derek directly. The two men studied each other across a distance that felt both physical and philosophical. The legendary martial artist and the humble bodybuilder, separated by decades of experience, but united by circumstances neither had chosen. Derek straightened, meeting Stephen's measuring gaze with newfound respect. They have my sister, he said simply. Melissa was recruited at Club Nexus 6 months ago. Talent scouts promised her modeling opportunities, international travel. She disappeared after agreeing to meet them for a portfolio session. Stephen listened carefully, recognizing the recruitment pattern from his previous investigation. Kozlov's people were sophisticated predators who understood exactly how to identify and manipulate vulnerable targets. I hired private investigators. Derek continued, his voice tight, with suppressed emotion. They traced her to a warehouse district downtown, but their investigation got shut down when they got too close to something big. Your social media presence, Stephen observed quietly, made you too visible for rescue attempts. They've probably been monitoring you since Melissa's disappearance. Agent Collins joined them, her expression grim. Derek's Instagram fame could actually be an asset now. His connections and visibility might provide access to Kozlov's world that traditional law enforcement couldn't achieve. Murphy emerged from the office, skepticism written across his features. Involving a civilian is asking for complications we can't afford. But Stephen saw potential that others missed. Derek's platform gives him legitimate reasons to be in places where federal agents would be noticed immediately. His transformation from victim to ally could be exactly what we need. What kind of transformation? Derek asked. The kind that means your old life is over, Stephen replied with characteristic directness. Win or lose, you can never return to what you were. These people don't forget, and they don't forgive. Are you prepared for that? Derek thought of Melissa's smile, of the sister who had always believed he could be better than his worst impulses. My sister is all the family I have left, he said. If there's a chance to get her back, I'll do whatever it takes. Murphy reluctantly nodded. Strict conditions. You follow Seagal's lead completely. You undergo immediate combat training. And you accept that this is likely a one-way trip. Derek extended his hand to Stephen. Teach me. Stephen clasped the offered hand, feeling calluses that spoke of dedication and discipline. Tomorrow we begin your real education. 24 hours later, Derek stood in a private training facility in Riverside County, his understanding of physical capability forever altered. Stephen had systematically destroyed every assumption Derek held about strength, power, and combat effectiveness. Forget everything you think you know about fighting, Steven instructed, watching Derek attempt a basic Aikido movement for the 20th time. Your body is a weapon, but it's also a target. Size makes you powerful, but it also makes you slow and predictable. Derek's bodybuilder physique, initially a disadvantage in martial arts training, gradually became an asset under Steven's patient guidance. His raw strength, properly channeled through Aikido principles, allowed him to execute throws and joint manipulations that would be impossible for smaller practitioners. Feel the energy, Steven coached as Derek practiced redirecting an attack. Don't fight against force, use it. Your opponent's strength becomes your strength. The concept clicked suddenly, Derek's muscle memory adapting to movements that felt more like dance than combat. His years of physical discipline transferred effectively to martial arts training, his dedication to perfection serving him well in this new arena. Steven taught pressure points with clinical precision, showing Derek exactly where to strike to cause unconsciousness, paralysis, or death. These techniques exist to save lives, he emphasized. Sometimes saving one life requires ending another. The responsibility is enormous. They practice scenarios involving multiple attackers, weapon disarmament, and escape techniques. Derek proved surprisingly adaptable, his social media experience making him naturally observant of details and patterns. Kozlov's network operates like a sophisticated business, Steven explained during a rest break. Underground fight clubs, recruitment fronts, psychological conditioning of victims. They break people systematically, turn hope into despair. Martha's gym served as their cover, evening training sessions disguised as personal fitness appointments. Other members grew accustomed to seeing Derek and his mysterious older trainer working through complex routines that looked nothing like traditional bodybuilding. After an intensive session, Derek successfully executed a combination technique against multiple training partners, redirecting attacks, using leverage to overcome superior numbers, finishing with controlled precision. Steven nodded approvingly. Now you're ready to enter their world. Tomorrow, we make contact. Derek flexed his hands, feeling newfound confidence in capabilities he had never possessed. What's the first move? We go where they recruit, Steven replied. Club Nexus. And you're going to help them find their next victim. Club Nexus pulsed with manufactured energy, bass lines that vibrated through expensive sound systems while beautiful people posed under strobing lights. Derek entered wearing designer clothes that proclaimed wealth and influence, his social media persona providing perfect cover for their infiltration mission. Steven followed at a careful distance, disguised as Derek's older business manager in an unremarkable suit. His weathered appearance made him invisible among the club's staff and older clientele. Remember, Steven had coached during their drive. You're documenting underground fitness culture for your followers. Stay curious, stay recording, stay alive. Derek approached the bar with practiced confidence, his phone capturing strategic angles while he ordered overpriced drinks. Within minutes, talent scouts had identified him as a high-value target. Natasha Volkov materialized beside him like expensive perfume given human form. 29, platinum blonde, wearing jewelry worth more than most people's cars, she embodied sophisticated predation. You're Derek Mansfield, she purred, recognition, lighting her predatory smile. 500,000 followers. Very impressive physique. Derek played his role perfectly, flexing slightly while maintaining casual arrogance. Always looking for new opportunities. My audience loves exclusive content, Steven observed from across the room, noting security positions and escape routes. While Natasha began her recruitment dance, the club operated exactly as his previous investigation had revealed, beautiful front concealing systematic evil. We have special events, Natasha continued, where real athletes compete for substantial prize money. Very exclusive, very profitable. Derek's eyes widened with manufactured interest. How exclusive? Tomorrow night. Private venue. Are you interested in seeing what real competition looks like? Derek glanced toward Steven, receiving an almost imperceptible nod. I'm very interested. The converted warehouse in the arts district buzzed with electric anticipation. Wealthy men in expensive suits mingled with criminal enforcers while placing increasingly large bets on the evening's violent entertainment. Derek and Steven, maintaining their manager-athlete cover, descended into Kozlov's underground empire. The basement had been transformed into a modern coliseum, fighting pit surrounded by tiered seating where the elite gathered to watch human suffering for sport. Television screens displayed odds and betting information while servers circulated. With champagne and cocaine, Derek's trained eyes swept the crowd, documenting faces through subtle phone recordings while Steven mapped security positions and emergency exits. The operation scope exceeded their worst expectations. Jesus, Derek whispered, watching victims being prepared for combat like gladiators before slaughter. Stay focused, Steven murmured. Document everything, but don't react emotionally. Then, Derek saw her. Melissa stood in a holding area near the fighting pit, her body showing signs of systematic abuse and psychological conditioning. 6 months of captivity had hollowed her cheeks and dulled her eyes, but Derek recognized his sister immediately. Every muscle in Derek's body tensed toward rescue attempt, but Steven's restraining hand on his shoulder prevented catastrophic error. Not yet, Steven whispered urgently. We save her by being smart, not reckless. Melissa was scheduled for the main event, a match against a professional female fighter twice her size. The crowd cheered as betting opened on her survival odds. Viktor Kozlov appeared in his private box overlooking the carnage, surveying his domain with satisfaction. At 62, he carried himself with absolute authority, a man accustomed to owning everything he surveyed. Steven locked eyes with the man he had hunted for months. Kozlov studied the newcomers with calculating intelligence, his predator's instincts evaluating potential threats. The night's preliminary fights began with brutal efficiency. Victims forced to battle trained killers while wealthy spectators wagered on their destruction. Derek maintained his cover while rage built inside him like molten steel. Soon, very soon, justice would be served. The plan unfolded with military precision during the chaos of fight night. Derek created his distraction by confronting Marcus Webb, Kozlov's head of security, while Steven moved like a ghost through the warehouse's shadows. You run a tight operation, Derek told Webb, his phone recording while they discussed betting strategies. My followers would love behind-the-scenes content. Webb, former MMA fighter turned criminal enforcer, preened under the attention while Steven systematically neutralized security personnel throughout the building. Each encounter showcased different aspects of Steven's martial arts mastery. A guard checking the rear exit found himself unconscious from a precise pressure point strike. 2 men patrolling the upper level discovered that Aikido throws worked even better from elevated positions. Derek held Webb's attention through increasingly aggressive questions about the Fight Club's operations, using his social media persona to justify invasive curiosity. When Webb finally grew suspicious, Derek was ready. You know what? Derek said, stepping closer. I think your setup is bullshit. Webb's punch came fast and professional, but Derek had learned to use force against itself. The larger man's momentum carried him past his target as Derek pivoted, executing the throw exactly as Steven had taught him. Meanwhile, Steven reached the holding area where Melissa and 12 other victims waited in terror. His whispered reassurances cut through their conditioning as he efficiently unlocked their restraints. Stay quiet, stay together, follow me, he instructed, leading them toward the emergency exit he had cleared earlier that Murphy's federal team surrounded. The building as Steven confronted Kozlov in his private box. The Russian crime lord looked up from his betting sheets with mild curiosity rather than concern. Mr. Seagal, Kozlov said calmly. I wondered when you would surface. Steven placed a thick folder of evidence on Kozlov's desk. Photographs, financial records, witness statements documenting the entire trafficking operation. Viktor Kozlov, you're under arrest for human trafficking, racketeering, and murder. Kozlov smiled coldly as federal agents flooded into the building. You have no idea how deep this goes. Behind Steven, Murphy appeared with his service weapon. Drawn, not at Kozlov, but directly at Steven's head, the betrayal hit with devastating completeness. Murphy's gun pressed against Steven's skull while corrupt federal agents swept into the building, their badges providing perfect cover for systematic elimination of witnesses and evidence. He's right. You know, Murphy said quietly, his voice carrying none of the urgency that had characterized their previous interactions. You really have no idea how deep this goes. Kozlov remained seated behind his desk, his earlier concern replaced by satisfied amusement. Detective Murphy has been invaluable to our operations for over 2 years. Cryptocurrency makes such convenient payment methods. Stephen absorbed the scope of Murphy's betrayal with grim resignation. Every piece of intelligence he had shared, every tactical plan he had developed, every witness he had tried to protect, all of it had been compromised from within the system meant to provide justice. The rescued victims were quickly recaptured by agents wearing federal badges, their brief moment of hope extinguished by systematic corruption. Derek lay bleeding from a sniper's bullet. His attempt to protect Melissa ended by precision marksmanship from the warehouse's upper level. Your investigation was allowed to proceed, Murphy explained conversationally, specifically to identify other law enforcement officials who couldn't be bought. Every raid you requested, every arrest you witnessed, we knew exactly who could be trusted and who needed to be eliminated. Melissa screamed as corrupt agents dragged her back toward the holding area, her brother's sacrifice rendered meaningless by institutional betrayal. Agent Wong died because she discovered my arrangement with Mr. Kozlov, Murphy continued. She tried to warn you, tried to establish independent contact with headquarters. Very inconvenient. Stephen calculated odds and distances while Murphy continued his villain's monologue. 10 armed men, multiple exit points blocked, civilian hostages scattered throughout the building. The beauty of corruption, Kozlov observed, is that it makes justice impossible. When the system itself serves evil, good men become criminals. By trying to enforce law, Stephen smiled grimly. You're right about one thing. Justice is impossible. His body exploded into motion as the warehouse erupted in controlled violence. But vengeance, that's still very achievable. Stephen's escape from the warehouse became a masterclass in tactical combat and environmental warfare. Wounded and outnumbered 10-1, he transformed the industrial building into a maze of death traps for Murphy's corrupt agents. The first kill came instantly. Murphy's gun redirected through Aikido principles, the detective's own bullet finding. Agent Rodriguez instead. Stephen vanished into the warehouse's maze of machinery and steam pipes before the body hit the ground. Find him, Murphy screamed, his carefully constructed betrayal dissolving into desperate manhunt. Stephen used the building's infrastructure as weapons. Steam pipes became scalding projectiles when he severed their connections. Electrical panels exploded in showers of sparks when kicked with precise force. Heavy machinery provided leverage for devastating throws that sent armed men flying into concrete walls. Each engagement showcased decades of combat experience. A corrupt agent pursuing him through maintenance corridors found himself hanging unconscious. From overhead pipes, 2 men flanking the loading dock discovered that industrial chains made excellent garrotes when wielded by expert hands. Outside, Martha Kowalski arrived with unexpected reinforcements. Frank DeMarco clutching his Korean War service pistol, Rose Santangelo carrying a medical kit, and a dozen gym regulars armed with righteous anger and improvised weapons. Nobody messes with our people, Martha declared, her Polish accent thick with determination. Stephen emerged from the warehouse's rear exit, blood streaming from multiple wounds, but his eyes blazing with unfinished purpose. This isn't over, he told his unlikely cavalry. Murphy has resources we haven't seen yet. The real battle was just beginning, and Stephen knew the enemy held every institutional advantage. But sometimes the right cause attracts the right people at exactly the right moment. In Martha's apartment above the gym, Stephen tended his wounds, while revealing the larger strategy he had been developing since first suspecting Murphy's treachery. His apparent vulnerability had been carefully calculated misdirection. I began suspecting Murphy during our second meeting, Stephen explained, applying pressure to a bullet graze on his shoulder. He knew details about my investigation that had never been officially reported: victim names, location specifics, operational timelines. Martha provided medical supplies while Stephen continued his explanation. Every piece of evidence I appeared to give Murphy was actually false information designed to trace the leak within law enforcement. The real evidence, video recordings, financial documents, witness statements, had been safely stored with Agent Collins through a separate communication channel that bypassed Murphy entirely. Tonight's operation was theater, Stephen continued. designed to force Murphy into revealing himself and the full scope of his network. I needed him to feel confident enough to show all his assets. Derek's social media documentation, initially a liability, had become crucial evidence. His live-stream footage and recorded conversations provided unalterable proof of Murphy's corruption and Kozlov's operations. But Derek is hurt, Martha protested, and Melissa is still captive. Stephen's jaw tightened with determination. Derek's wound isn't life-threatening. And Melissa, he showed Martha a tracking device hidden in his sleeve. Agent Collins has been monitoring Kozlov's movements through this signal. We know exactly where they're taking the victims. Martha stared at the small device. You planned all of this. Murphy's betrayal was predictable once I identified the pattern, Stephen replied. What surprised me was Derek's transformation. He's become something I didn't expect. What's that? A warrior. Outside, Derek regained consciousness with murder in his eyes and Stephen's teachings burning in his memory. 2 days later, Derek sat in Agent Collins' safe house while Stephen finalized their assault plan. The bullet wound in Derek's shoulder had forced adaptation of his fighting style, ironically making him more precise and economical in his movements. Your injury is actually an advantage, Stephen explained, watching Derek practice one-handed pressure point techniques. It forces you to rely on precision instead of strength, technique instead of power. You're becoming a true martial artist. Derek's enforced restraint had awakened something deeper than physical capability. His movements carried new thoughtfulness, each technique executed with deliberate intention rather than brute force application. Collins spread intelligence reports across the table. Kozlov's final gambit is tomorrow night, a massive fight event at his Malibu estate. International clients, dozens of victims, millions in betting revenue. The photographs showed a clifftop fortress overlooking the Pacific, multiple security checkpoints, and armed guards protecting Kozlov's ultimate expression of criminal enterprise. Melissa is scheduled for the main event, Collins continued grimly. A death match against 3 opponents simultaneously. Kozlov intends it as both entertainment and a final message that he remains untouchable. Stephen studied architectural plans of the estate. 2-pronged infiltration. Derek enters as a competitor, using his social media credentials. I infiltrate through the catering staff. Derek tested his mobility, working through combat combinations that accommodated his injured shoulder. The limitation had forced him to internalize Stephen's philosophy about minimum necessary force. You're not the same person who walked into that gym, Stephen observed approvingly. Tomorrow night, you'll prove it to yourself and everyone else. Derek flexed his functional hand, feeling newfound confidence in capabilities that transcended mere physical strength. What about Murphy? Stephen's smile carried dangerous promise. Murphy will be there. Kozlov needs his corrupt contacts for protection, and Murphy needs to witness his investment's final payoff. And then we finish what we started. Kozlov's Malibu estate at sunset resembled a fortress of modern luxury, perched on cliffs overlooking the endless Pacific. Multiple security checkpoints and dozens of armed guards protected the evening's climactic entertainment from unwanted interruption. Derek arrived as a scheduled competitor, his Instagram fame providing perfect cover while concealing his transformation into something far more dangerous. His interactions with other fighters demonstrated newfound humility and respect for martial arts traditions. Among the captive fighters, Derek spotted Melissa immediately. 6 months of psychological conditioning had nearly broken her spirit, but recognition flickered in her eyes when she saw him. For the first time in months, hope registered in her expression. Stephen infiltrated through the catering entrance, his previous film experience providing authentic cover as kitchen staff. He moved through service corridors with ghostly precision, systematically mapping the estate's layout while positioning improvised weapons throughout the property. The evening's preliminary matches began with characteristic brutality. Victims forced to fight trained killers while wealthy spectators placed increasingly large bets. Derek participated in early bouts to maintain his cover, using Stephen's teachings to defeat opponents without causing permanent damage. Each victory demonstrated his complete transformation from social media showman to disciplined warrior. Where once he had sought domination, now he practiced protection. Where once he had shown off, now he showed restraint. The wealthy audience gradually shifted from bloodlust to genuine respect as Derek's skill became apparent. His fighting style embodied everything Steven had taught him about turning strength into service. As the main event approached, Derek and Melissa made eye contact across the fighting pit. She recognized not just her brother, but someone who had become worthy of the sister who had always believed he could be better. Steven, working systematically through the estate's security apparatus, began his own demonstration of 40 years martial arts mastery applied to the protection of innocents. Steven's assault on Kozlov's security forces began in the estate's professional kitchen, where culinary implements became lethal weapons in the hands of a master. The first guard entered seeking a snack and found himself facing someone who understood that knives were tools, not toys. The confrontation lasted 3 seconds. The guard's gun clattered across marble tile while he collapsed, unconscious from a precise pressure point strike delivered with the flat of a carving knife. Steven moved deeper into the service areas, his knowledge of commercial kitchens providing perfect cover for systematic elimination. Each encounter demonstrated different aspects of his 4-decade martial arts journey. A second guard discovered that commercial meat tenderizers made excellent nunchucks when connected by kitchen twine. 2 men patrolling the wine cellar learned that Aikido principles worked perfectly with champagne bottles, their own momentum redirected into devastating impact with stone walls. Steven progressed through service corridors like a ghost with purpose, clearing escape routes while moving toward the main entertainment area. His movement was methodical and economical, every action serving multiple tactical purposes. The encounter with Marcus Webb came in the estate's marble-lined foyer. Webb had survived Derek's earlier throw through superior conditioning and professional paranoia, but facing Steven represented an entirely different level of threat. "I wondered when you'd show up," Webb said, drawing a combat knife with practiced efficiency. Steven didn't respond with words. The battle spanned multiple rooms, foyer to living room to grand staircase, each environment used strategically. Webb's MMA training proved inadequate against someone who had spent decades perfecting techniques designed to end fights quickly. The conclusion came when Steven used Webb's own aggressive charge to redirect him down the marble staircase. Aikido principles transforming the architecture itself into a weapon. Webb's unconscious form came to rest at the bottom, surrounded by expensive art that had witnessed his defeat. Steven paused at the staircase's summit, listening to sounds from the main entertainment area below. Derek was facing impossible odds, while protecting Melissa, demonstrating everything Steven had taught him about true strength serving others. Time to join the final battle and show Kozlov why legends never truly fade. Steven descended toward the sounds of combat, his eyes blazing with righteous purpose and 40 years of accumulated skill that in the underground fighting pit. Derek faced 3 opponents simultaneously, while Melissa remained chained to a post in the arena's center. The wealthy spectators cheered for blood while placing final bets on the outcome, their appetite for violence fed by systematic human suffering. Derek's injured shoulder forced complete reliance on technique over strength, every movement demonstrating Steven's teachings about using superior numbers against themselves. The first opponent, a former boxer turned enforcer, came straight forward with predictable aggression. Derek sidestepped and redirected, using the man's momentum to drive him into the arena's concrete barrier. "Protect the center," Derek reminded himself, keeping all 3 attackers away from Melissa while gradually eliminating threats through precise application of force. The second opponent proved more intelligent, circling to create angles while the third coordinated flanking maneuvers. Derek used the arena's features, steps, barriers, even Melissa's chains, as tactical advantages, turning environmental obstacles into weapons. Each victory showcased Derek's complete transformation. Where once he had sought domination through size and intimidation, now he demonstrated protection through skill and intelligence. The crowd's reaction shifted from bloodlust to genuine respect as Derek's martial arts mastery became apparent. "He's actually skilled," one spectator observed with surprise. Melissa, inspired by her brother's courage and transformation, began fighting back against her psychological conditioning. 6 months of systematic abuse had nearly broken her spirit, but watching Derek risk everything for her protection rekindled hope she had thought permanently extinguished. The final opponent presented the greatest challenge, a professional killer. who understood that Derek's shoulder injury represented exploitable weakness. But Derek had learned to turn limitations into advantages, his restricted mobility forcing greater economy and precision. The decisive moment came when Derek executed a perfect Aikido combination, redirecting the killer's knife thrust into a wrist lock that became a devastating throw. The man's unconscious form joined his associates on the arena floor. Derek stood breathing heavily but victorious, his transformation from arrogant bodybuilder to disciplined protector complete in the eyes of everyone who witnessed his performance. Above them, in Kozlov's private box, Steven Seagal appeared like an avenging spirit ready to deliver final justice. The crowd fell silent as they recognized the legendary figure who had come to end their entertainment permanently. The confrontation in Kozlov's private box became a three-way battle showcasing different philosophies of violence. Steven faced Victor Kozlov and Detective Murphy simultaneously, each opponent representing distinct aspects of systematic corruption and evil. Murphy relied on police training and firearms, his service weapon providing range advantage in the confined space. Steven disarmed him with classical Aikido, a simple wrist turn that sent the pistol spinning across expensive carpet while Murphy stumbled into Kozlov's desk. Kozlov fought like a street survivor, his techniques brutal and efficient from decades of criminal advancement through violence. He grabbed a crystal decanter, swinging it at Steven's head with intent to kill rather than incapacitate. Steven ducked beneath the swing and responded with a pressure point strike that numbed Kozlov's arm, the decanter crashing against bulletproof windows overlooking the Pacific. The battle moved from office to balcony as Steven systematically dismantled both opponents through superior technique and tactical intelligence. "You cannot win," Kozlov snarled, producing a backup knife from his expensive jacket. "My network extends through every level of government." "Your network," Steven replied calmly, avoiding the blade through fluid movement, "dies with you." Murphy attempted to rejoin the fight, but discovered that Steven could handle multiple opponents through strategic positioning. Every attack was redirected, every aggressive move turned into the attacker's disadvantage through 40 years of martial arts mastery. The decisive moment came when Murphy and Kozlov coordinated a simultaneous assault from opposite directions. Steven dropped beneath their attacks, swept Murphy's legs while redirecting Kozlov's momentum, and used their own force to drive them together in devastating collision. Murphy collapsed unconscious from the impact, while Kozlov staggered backward toward the balcony railing, his expensive suit torn and bloodied. Steven advanced with implacable determination, his movements carrying the authority of absolute justice. "This ends now," Steven declared, his whispered words carrying more menace than Murphy's earlier threats. Kozlov's confident smile had vanished completely, replaced by recognition that he faced someone whose commitment to justice transcended institutional corruption and personal danger. Below them, Derek helped Melissa stand while federal agents, Colin's clean team, secured the estate and arrested the surviving criminal network. 3 months later, Muscle Beach Fitness had transformed into something entirely different from Derek's original domain. The gym buzzed with purposeful energy as young people learned disciplines that transcended mere physical development. Derek stood before a class of teenagers, his approach to instruction embodying everything Steven had taught him about strength, serving others rather than the self. His Instagram account now promoted martial arts education, victim advocacy, and community service rather than bodybuilding vanity and social media narcissism. "True strength," Derek explained to his students, repeating words that had once seemed foreign but now felt natural, "comes from protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The greatest victory is achieved through minimum necessary force." The students, some recovering from their own traumatic experiences, listened with respect earned through Derek's demonstrated commitment to their development rather than his own aggrandizement. Melissa had become a powerful advocate for trafficking victims, her survival story helping law enforcement understand the psychological aspects of victim conditioning and recovery. Her testimony had been instrumental in dismantling Kozlov's remaining network and convicting corrupt officials throughout the system. Martha's Gym served as headquarters for their expanded mission, with Steven visiting regularly to train the next generation of protectors. His presence brought legitimacy and wisdom to their efforts while connecting traditional martial arts philosophy to modern justice work. The final scene showed Derek teaching a combination technique to a young woman whose brother had been murdered by gang violence. She executed the movement perfectly, her determination echoing Derek's own transformation from bully to protector. Stephen watched from the doorway, noting how his former antagonist had internalized not just physical techniques, but the spiritual principles that made martial arts meaningful. As he prepared to leave, Derek approached with genuine gratitude. "You didn't just teach me how to fight," Derek said, extending his hand with newfound humility. "You taught me what's worth fighting for." Stephen clasped the offered hand, feeling calluses that spoke of dedicated service rather than selfish ambition. "You found that yourself. I just showed you where to look." As Stephen walked away, his ponytail catching afternoon sunlight streaming through gym windows, Derek returned to his students with renewed purpose. The man who had once sought dominance through intimidation now found meaning through protection. His transformation complete, but his mission just beginning. Outside, Stephen smiled slightly, knowing his work here was finished, but always ready when justice called again. If you liked the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel